These are the types of things they should teach us in school, but they don't. Hello, hello. So, I have a younger sister who is fresh out of high school and is looking for jobs. So I was helping her build her LinkedIn and her resume, and I thought it would be a really good idea to share what she and I were working on with you. If it just so happens to be that you're fresh out of high school, even better, I would fully encourage you to consider going straight into the workforce. Even if it's just as a gap year, you can always go back to college. But regardless of where you are in life, I think these skills are going to be really good for you to have. So enough with the intro, let's just dive right into it. First things first, you're probably going to need a template. Now, there are tons of template/resume building websites out there. Most of them are not free. You have to pay once you actually build your resume. I would still encourage you to take a look at some of those, because even if they ask you to pay for you to actually get your finalized resume, they might help prompt you as to some of the descriptions that you can use for your experience or what kinds of words to use. So I would recommend taking a look at those. But there are tons of free templates on Google Drive that you can modify and work with as well. Secondly, there are three kind of overarching guidance points that you should keep in mind the entire time you're building a resume. The first one and most important one is don't be humble. This was something that's really difficult for me, and I think is difficult for a lot of women in general, but the whole point of a resume is to sell yourself. It's to make yourself out to be the ideal candidate for the person on the other side. So don't be afraid to highlight your exceptionality and use big, pretty words that you might not feel like you deserve, but as long as you can kind of back up your thought process for putting something down on your resume and explain the experience that went behind it. Everybody uses flowery language, so you should too, in order to stand out amongst other candidates or even just compete. The second general guidance point is don't use the word I. Don't say, I did XYZ, or I am this type of person. You want to write this as though somebody else was writing on behalf of you. So, did XYZ, is this type of person. Never use I. And the third thing to keep in mind is to keep all your verbs in present tense. So if you want to write your entire resume in past tense, do that. If you want to write it in present tense, do that. Just keep it consistent. So, did, worked, or does, works, right? All right, now let's dive right into the nitty-gritties. The first thing you're going to want is a headline. And in the headline or title, you're basically going to want your first name, last name, email, phone number, and maybe the city where you're based. Now, obviously it's up to you how much of that information you want to disclose, but it's pretty standard practice to include your contact information, and sometimes it's important to put where you work. If you are looking for a remote job, maybe it's not as important, but as a standard, you should include the city where you live. All right, so right under the header, you're going to have a bio. And a bio is roughly 2 to 3 sentences that should summarize what the rest of your resume says. So a good way to format that is who you are, what you want, and what skills or relevant experience you're bringing to the table. So as an example of what a bio might look like, it might say something like hardworking high school graduate, looking for experience in sales, worked in retail, interned with XYZ, da-da-da-da. But you don't want to have more than 2 or 3 sentences. Right under your bio, you have the option of including your education. Now, if your resume is looking kind of short and you did well in high school, I would recommend adding this portion. If you didn't do so well in high school, maybe opt out of it. If you're going to include this section, I would have some test scores, your GPA, maybe your school ranking, and then any applicable classes. So if you're looking for an internship with a hospital, maybe you'll include that you took a biology course, for example. But as I mentioned, this section is completely optional, and after you have your first job, you should probably start omitting this section. Okay, moving on for probably the most important part of your resume, your experience. Now, experience can look like a lot of things. It can look like previous jobs, internships, volunteer work, anything you can think of that is relevant to the job you want, I would include it in this section. So the way this section is formatted is usually you have your job title, the company or place that you worked at, how long you worked there, and then a few bullet points describing what you did during your time there. Now, something that really helps me when I'm thinking through these bullet points is to think in projects. So if you had a job and you worked on multiple things, try to break those things up into smaller projects and describe what you did. So for example, if you were a cashier, you probably had a few different types of responsibilities. One, you interacted with customers, and that's customer support. So think through the skills and interactions that came out of that. Two, maybe you closed out the register, which involves some accounting and also a lot of trust, so that would be a separate bullet point and project that you could think through. Maybe you also helped keep track of inventory, so that would be another project that you would separate into a third bullet point and break down into kind of further skills and experiences. Now, when you're starting each bullet point, you're probably going to start with a verb. So worked on or handled XYZ. Now, it's really important to use strong action verbs. So as an example, you could say helped keep stock of inventory, or you can say managed inventory or led inventory tracking efforts. I think you can see what I'm getting at, which is that you want to sell yourself. As I mentioned earlier, don't be humble. Make this as impressive as possible. As long as you can back this up, and when you're in an interview and an employer asks you, oh, I see that you have experience managing inventory, you say, yeah, and here's what I did, right? So again, say something like managed inventory rather than helped manage inventory. Now, the last thing is, with each bullet point, the ideal format goes something like accomplished XYZ by this metric or quantitative measurement by doing XYZ. So what I mean by that is you want to use qualitative data, therefore like descriptions of things, but you also want to try using quantitative data or numbers wherever possible. Now, I know this is hard, so you don't have to force it if you can't, but as an example, you could say something like improved customer service satisfaction by 3% by adding an email signature with a smiley face. Don't do that. Don't add smiley faces to your email signatures. But as you can see, that's an example of the format that you would want to follow wherever possible. If you don't have quantitative data, that's fine. Keep it more high level, but anywhere that you can track down those types of measurements is great. All right, moving on to the next portion of your resume, skills. Now, skills can be further broken down into two categories, soft skills and hard skills. Soft skills are more intangible skills. So for example, communication or leadership or customer service. Those are just more overarching and don't have as many quantitative measurements behind them. Your hard skills, on the other hand, are going to be more concrete. So for example, do you know a coding language, Python? Or are there any software tools that you know how to use? So Canva would be one of them. All right, and then the last section is optional, and I'm kind of lumping it together into a bunch of different things that you could try, but those might be certifications, accomplishments, languages, anything else that you can think of. So if you're fluent in more than one language, put it here. If you've been recognized for anything, so if you're in high school and you won some kind of sports award or academic award, throw it here also. And certifications are huge. If you can get your hands on any of those certifications, the more official, the better. But you can also start places like LinkedIn certifications. I honestly don't recommend them over more official certifications from like a state agency or a third-party educational service, but LinkedIn is a great place to start, and if you can prove that you actually have the skills that the LinkedIn certification says you do, so for example, if you take a coding course on LinkedIn and you can show a portfolio where you built an app, for example, that works as well. All right, well that is it for my crash course in building a resume. If you have any questions, please put them below. I'd be more than happy to help. And yeah, good luck. I wish you all the best, whether you are straight out of high school, straight out of college, or just looking to learn how to build your resume. I really hope this helps, and good luck out there.